I'm joined by Sohaib Shahid. He's the director at the Conference Board of Canada. Sohaib, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So let's, I'm going to start with the obvious question. What is the Conference Board of Canada?
Well, the Conference Board of Canada is our country's oldest and largest independent applied research organization.
Okay.
Since 1954, we have, leveraged our trusted research to deliver unique insights into Canada's toughest problems, so leaders can build a better and stronger future for Canada and also for our future generations. And my role, as part of the Conference Board of Canada's economic forecasting and knowledge area, I lead the economic innovation team and its new economic product research and development initiatives.
So can you give some examples of the types of projects run by the Conference Board of Canada, the CBOC?
As I said, we are an economic powerhouse and lever our deep knowledge through a team of economists that provide insights into data, including long and short-term economic forecasts for the country and for provinces. We also do quarterly analyses of Canadian provincial performance. We also create monthly indices for consumer confidence and consumer spending. And all of this is supplemented by our metropolitan center outlooks, our national outlook, as well as our index of business confidence. We also provide our insights through regular thought leadership commentaries on current issues and other topics of interest. Now, outside of the economic space, we have an ongoing analysis that we conduct of various sectors and industries, which includes us looking at immigration trends in Canada, the HR landscape, sustainability issues in the country, and topics confronting Indigenous and Northern communities as well.
Certainly some important work there. What have been some of your major successes, would you say?
Well, some successes have been the continued growth of our economic insights, which speaks to the important role our insights play for organizations across Canada and how we've remained a trusted voice. And not just that, members of our senior leadership team are regularly invited to speak and share their views to both governments and organizations across the country. And we are regularly cited and call upon media for our comments and insights.
Can you give some examples of some of your member organizations?
Our members include entities within the government, both at the federal level as well as the provincial level. And our members also include the private sector and different sectors within the private sector.
So what are some of the challenges you faced?
One key challenge is how quickly the economic space is changing, particularly in the wake of the pandemic and massive government support that was provided to Canadians during the height of the pandemic. Not just that, the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates at the fastest pace in decades and ongoing decades high inflation is something we are keeping a close eye on. And overall, the economic landscape is shifting at a faster pace than we've ever seen in a recent past. And I'm glad with how we've dealt with it, and I'm glad with how we're dealing with it right now.
So let's get to the partnership with Moneris. First of all, when did that start?
We've been in negotiations for some time now, and we formalized our relationship earlier in 2022.
So why did you choose Moneris as your data services partner?
Well, one of the things that Moneris has, and one of the things that really attracted us was high-frequency data that Moneris has. One of the things that the pandemic has done is that it has reminded us how important high-frequency data are. Because of the pandemic, we've seen developments take place at a faster pace than conventional economic data was being put out. So the Moneris data, it helps us provide insights into consumer spending in Canada. Because the thing with consumer spending is that it is one of the biggest drivers of GDP. And according to our forecasts, consumer spending or the lack thereof would really drive GDP growth in the next few months.
Right.
And the reason consumer spending is important is because, during the height of the pandemic, the government provided a lot of money to Canadians. And several months later, even now, Canadians are sitting on a lot of excess savings. And as they use these savings, we will see an increase in consumer spending. Now, the other angle to look at here is that, when consumer confidence goes down, consumer spending goes down.
Right.
And since consumer spending is one of the main drivers of GDP growth, when consumer spending goes down, GDP growth goes down. And that is where all of this becomes relevant in the recession talk that we've been hearing lately. So we were mindful of that, and we were looking for high frequency, high quality data. And this is one of the reasons why we looked at Moneris to do this.
So let's talk about consumer spending. Back in April, the CBOC put out their first Index of Consumer Spending report.
That's right.
What was the reaction by your members to that report?
Oh, it was great because I think until then there was a void in the Canadian economic landscape when it came to high frequency consumer spending data. And we helped fill that void
Right.
in collaboration with Moneris.
How often does the report get updated?
The report is updated every month.
And how do you arrive at this index?
We use some econometric techniques in the back end, and we do our due diligence when it comes to the raw data that we get from Moneris. And with the help of that, we create an index. And the index is at the federal level as well as the provincial level.
Just to give a bit of a context, what is the current index right now? Let's say national index, since this is a podcast will be listened across Canada. Like, for example, I know for the past 14 consecutive weeks, it's been below 100 points, right? What does that mean, right? Does that mean, because everyone is afraid that we're going into recession, what does it look like on a good year? That kind of, just to get a little bit of a comparison for some context.
Yes, I'm just looking at it. It's at 95.8.
Yeah.
So the latest one we have. I think that's a great question. So I think consumer spending has remained fairly weak in recent months, and there are two main reasons for this. One is the high inflation we're seeing. The other is the high interest rates. As far as inflation goes, the reason higher inflation is bad for consumer spending is because it reduces the purchasing power of consumers, and as a result, they buy less. And the reason higher interest rates are not good for Canadians is because it makes borrowing money to purchase items more difficult. So we're living in a time when we have decades high inflation and decades high interest rates. Both of these things combined are leading to the weak inflation we are seeing.
Right.
Now, if interest rates continue to go up and if the pace of interest rate increases is not brought down, and if inflation remains persistently high, we might end up in a situation that economists call stagflation, which is weak economic growth and high inflation.
Okay.
And that is not a spot that we want to be in. Now, you might have heard a lot of talk about recession risk. We also have a recession tracker that we produce at the Conference Board of Canada, and we've seen the likelihood of recession increase in recent months. And the likelihood has increased as consumer spending has decreased.
So ICS is a pretty good indicator of this happening.
It is one of the indicators, and it is a good indicator.
What would be kind of a good target range that we'd want to see the index in for a healthy economy? Is there one? Like, what's a healthy range we should be seeing it at for there to be healthy growth, for example?
I wouldn't say that there's one healthy range, because the way we look at it is we compare the index compared to the previous month.
Right. Okay.
That is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is to look at it historically. Now, if you look at it compared to the previous month, if it's going up compared to the previous month, that is good news. Right. But if it is going up from really low levels, that should be contextualized.
Right.
And that contextualization is what we do in our analysis that we provide with the index of consumer spending.
For example, during the pandemic, it was probably pretty low year over year.
That's probably why we saw a sharp increase in May this year, right?
We did see quite a sharp increase this year, but I think I would shy away from giving one number because the number itself would really depend on several factors, including, the base year we use for constructing the index.
So how are the tools provided by Moneris helping CBOC members with these projects?
Well, as I said, Canada's gross domestic product, the GDP, is largely made up of consumption. And, one way to gauge how the economy is performing is to look at how much Canadians are spending. Yet across the Canadian economic landscape, there was a lack of readily available consumer spending data.
Right.
Now, once we had Moneris data, we created the index of consumer spending for provinces and for Canada as a whole. And we did this because we intended the index to inform senior policymakers on how the country and the provinces are doing. And as I mentioned before as well, updates on this index are released monthly.
Previous to your partnership with Moneris, what did you guys use?
We relied on StatCan for consumer spending data and retail data. And with Moneris, though, we are able to update our index at a monthly frequency and at a higher frequency than before.
Gives you a more real-time view of the data.
That's right.
Very good. What sorts of services do you think you'll take advantage of in the future?
As we grow as an organization and as our membership expands, our needs will also evolve. I know Moneris also has more disaggregated consumer spending data than just the federal and provincial level. And I think there's a lot of potential to further explore some of the disaggregated data that Moneris produces, for example, at the city level. And I think that is something that we would be open to exploring. And I think in the months ahead, I continue to see, our partnership as a win-win. The CBOC, the Conference Board of Canada, that is, benefits from Moneris's excellent data on consumer spending. And Moneris benefits from the Conference Board's quality research expertise and excellent reputation.
What does the future look like for the CBOC?
Well, looking ahead, we plan to maintain our leadership in research and continue being a trusted voice for Canadians. And, keeping our finger on the pulse of the Canadian economic landscape and across other key focus areas to address the most pressing issues and problems we are facing here in Canada today.
And if listeners wanted to learn more about the CBOC or find this ICS report, where would they look?
You can go to our website, conferenceboard.ca, and there you can find the index of consumer spending readily available.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sodhi.
My pleasure.